So after 7 long seasons, the Ottawa Senators are finally back in the playoffs. And yes, it was a long road to get back, and the team faced many hardships over those years. And now, in less than a week, they will be playing playoff games again. Alright, so a big reason why the team is going back to the playoffs is because of the way they've played defense this year, in particular in the defensive zone. Their D-zone coverage is way better than in years past. Before, guys would get multiple chances alone in front of the net. Now it seems like Ottawa always has at least 2 or 3 players back at the front of the net when the puck goes there, so it's a lot harder for teams to generate offense against them in the high danger areas in their own end. And how can we not talk about the Sens goals against coming down from years past without talking about the goaltending? I mean, Linus Ullmark and even Anton Forsberg too, for as much heat as he's taken over the years, and at sometimes rightfully so. I mean, heck, he got off to a rough start, you could say, the first maybe 2-3 months of this season. And then I found from maybe late January or so onwards, he really played up to the standards you would expect him to play at. He looked a lot more like the goalie that Ottawa signed to that 3-year extension back in the 21-22 season. And him getting back to that form really helped. And obviously Linus Ullmark, I mean, he's just been outstanding for most of this year. Yes, he's had some questionable moments in net. He's let in some questionable goals. He's been inconsistent at times, but I think he's been a big reason why. I know he's been a big reason why the Ottawa Senators are going back to the playoffs. And Ullmark really started to look like the goalie that Ottawa envisioned when they traded for him last June, starting in December. He was lights out for a good stretch there in December. Then he got injured. When he first came back off that injury, he wasn't maybe the greatest goalie in the league at the time. He was he almost looked like the guy that was in net the first 2 months. He was a little inconsistent. Then in March, he really got his game back again, and that was a big help, obviously, for Ottawa to get into the playoffs, like I said. Now, Travis Green deserves a lot of credit for the Sens' turnaround this season, and while I don't think he's the perfect coach, I think some of his systems, at times, some parts of it are a little bit questionable in my opinion anyways. I would like to see things like, maybe they forecheck a little harder. I know he harps on that they want to forecheck hard and stuff, but I think, it could be even more harder to play against for the opponents to break out of their zone and stuff like that. He has a really good feel, in my opinion, for players that are going that night. And, if there's a couple guys on a line that are really going and one that's maybe not going as much, and let's say there's a guy further down the lineup that's really going, he'll put that guy higher up in the lineup with those 2 guys that are going. And like I said, he's got a really good feel for that, and I think that's been a really big help for the Sens too this season. And I think Travis Green does deserve some consideration for the Jack Adams Award. I don't know if he'll win it or even be, in the final 3. But, I think maybe a guy like Carberry or someone like that in Washington could win it. But for Travis Green, I mean, regardless, like I said, he's done a good job. And if he even doesn't win Coach of the Year, I mean, it's not that big of a deal. I'm sure he's just more worried about, having success here in the playoffs now with his team. And I think the Sens' success this year all starts back last summer. Steve Staios went out and did a great job, I think, for the most part. Yeah, there was maybe a trade or 2 that I thought was a little questionable at the time, but they've all pretty much worked out. I mean, you can't really argue with any of them at this point. And I think he went out and identified what this team needs before, the last couple of years, the 22-23 season and the year before this season. I think, Ottawa, they were kind of a one-dimensional team. Yes, they had a lot of, they were kind of getting a lot of names there. Dorian, we all knew him as a big name chaser. He acquired some players that had a lot of offensive skill, but maybe not exactly what the team needed at the time. That's why, they were more of a one-dimensional team. They would score a lot of goals, but they just couldn't play in their own end. Some of that was coaching. The goaltending was not great either before this season, and also the players too. The personnel just, I just don't think they were really the greatest defensive players in the league, that's for sure. So Staios bringing in guys like Michael Amadio, David Perron, Nick Cousins even. I'm not the biggest Nick Cousins fan in the world, I'll have to admit. Yeah, maybe, I don't dislike him as much as I did, let's say, 6 months ago. But, he's probably still not my favorite player on the team. But you can't argue with the fact that he's been effective when he's in the lineup. Obviously, he's been out with an injury for a long time. But I mean, him, Perron, Amadio, like I said, those guys, they've been there before. All 3 of them have won Stanley Cups. They bring in Nick Jensen, too, another veteran who, hasn't won a cup, but he's been in playoffs. He's good defensively. He knows what it takes, in the playoffs, even though, like I said, hasn't won a cup, but still he's been there before, and he can impart some wisdom onto these young guys that'll be playing in their first ever playoffs, along with the other 3 players I mentioned. And with those 4 notable additions from last offseason, maybe aren't the biggest additions in the world, you would think. I think for Ottawa they were, because they really filled a need for them. And they made them better defensively. Another thing too is these young players that the Sens have now, the last few years they were kind of one-dimensional players too. Stützle, Batherson especially, they were guys that were always being questioned about their defensive game and stuff like that. And while young players like Stützle and Batherson still aren't maybe the greatest defensive players in the world, they've improved a lot, and I think they've improved so much to the point where they're no longer considered, in my opinion anyways, one-dimensional players. I think at this point they're competent, at least, at the very least competent in their own end. Now they can defend against other teams' top lines. Obviously that's not the matchup Travis Green wants against other teams' top lines every night. Usually it's Shane Pinto, who's done a terrific job this year. And the growth we've seen from some of these young players on the defensive side of the puck has been monumental in the team taking a step forward. Another player I want to mention too is Thomas Chabot. This guy has been, ripped on so hard over the years for his lack of defensive play. He's been terrific defensively this year, and he's still put up a pretty good amount of points. At the time I'm recording this video, he's put up 44 points. He's kind of gotten hot offensively lately, and he still hasn't sacrificed his defensive game. I think at the time I'm recording this, he's plus 19 on the season. And I think Nick Jensen has been really good for Thomas Chabot, and he's really helped him take a step forward defensively too. So we got to give Nick Jensen some big time credit for that as well. Alright, so there's my look at the Ottawa Senators turnaround this season. Please let me know what you all think in the comment section below. Also, please like and subscribe and share this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.